Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here. I was lying in bed, my head was on the pillow, the lights were out, and I was thinking about feminism. And then I had a thought that made me get up and turn on the lights and get out my laptop, and I was ready to make a nice, long, rambly video where would have no idea what I was talking about, but would hopefully get it out. And I kind of stopped myself and said, before I go on 100 tangents, maybe I should try to write down what I'm thinking about to save all you poor souls out there who have joined me on this strange journey as I make YouTube videos. Respect you guys' time. So the reason I woke up is I had a negative interaction with a feminist on Twitter talking about male gaze and women in refrigerators. And I hope this is something that's become clear over time. I'm not really interested in wrecking feminists. I'm just completely fascinated by contemporary feminists. It's almost like they're an alien race to me, and I'm completely fascinated by this bizarre alien race, and I want to know as much as I possibly can. And maybe to preface this tweet thread, me talking about feminism predates my serious videos where I tried to examine feminism and look into these arguments and almost kind of make scholarly summaries of feminist arguments. It goes back to a life experience where I was touring Germany, I think it was, and this is a really, really old video, so some of my oldest followers may remember this, but I've gained a lot of new subscribers since then. So when I'm in Germany, I'm watching a feminist performance artwork on film in a museum. And this feminist is mocking sexism in the art world, and she's portraying various characters. So she pretends to be a painter who's a sexist, and then she pretends to be a curator who is sexist but also kind of progressive, and then she pretends to be a self-hating woman who has some other role in the art world. Pretty much she's making a feminist critique of the art world. And every time this feminist performance artist would change character, she would remove an article of clothing. And so I'm just completely stunned by what she's doing. I can't believe what I'm seeing in this museum. And at the end, she's naked and she's crying, and she is talking about how she regrets something. She regrets how she once, as a young artist, had a strong desire to make things, and she has lost this desire. And what I realized this was a moment of self-confession. This is a moment where the feminist performance artist stopped making fun of sexism in the art world and started admitting something true about herself, which is that she used to want to make beautiful art, and she had stopped making beautiful art. She obviously had transitioned into making avant-garde feminist performance art, and she was expressing her sadness in the performance artwork itself. And this bizarre work changed my life, because what it made me realize is I could have success as a millionaire avant-garde postmodern artist, but that wouldn't make me happy if I destroyed my desire to actually make beautiful art in pursuit of the popular and very expensive avant-garde art. So that sort of began my journey of just being fascinated in what the heck is going on with feminist art theory. I want to know more about this. And so then, like many people, I'm sure I started going to YouTube to hear what people would have to say. And like many people, I encountered the rationalist skeptic community, the Gamergate YouTubers, the MGTOW and MRA YouTubers, and YouTube has really changed everything. I think there's no going back to a pre-YouTube world. So with that tangent, I now want to look at this thread, which I wrote to try to keep me on focus and on point. So I wrote in the first tweet that I woke up and had a hot take and almost made this video. And so here's me trying to think through this issue. What I'm worried about is the holes in feminist cultural criticism and the bad things it could lead to. Oh, I used the wrong holes. Bad, Marmaduke fan. Bad. Proofread before you tweet. I need an edit button in Twitter. My OCD's kicking in. What prompted this was a conversation with a feminist animator who blocked me after I asked her opinion on an anti-SJW video. I thought of it because this animator was complaining about Male Gaze, and Women in Refrigerators. The video I was actually thinking of was this one by Helping Hand. In some ways, I think it's even more important than the original video that preceded this one. So Helping Hand is an anti-SJW YouTuber. He's got a couple pretty popular videos about the diversity problem in Marvel Comics. And in some ways, you might say he was kind of like one of the YouTubers who was paying attention to the same cultural trends that Diversity in Comics was, even before Diversity in Comics started his channel. So the first video he made, he is talking about social justice in the media in general, and he briefly uses Kim Possible as an illustration of that. And he got some blowback from Kim Possible fans, and so he makes this follow-up video, Kim Possible, Analysis and Conclusion. And I think his analysis video is, when I kind of dimly remembered it, this was the one I was actually trying to remember, not the first one. And the reason this one is interesting is he goes through multiple episodes of Kim Possible to make an argument that this illustrates later cultural trends in social justice, that Kim Possible is sort of consistently cruel and petty to Ron Stoppable. And Helping Hand sees this as an illustration of essentially misandry or a radical feminist agenda in a children's cartoon. Now, I watched this video a year ago and it stuck with me. And what's interesting is I'm not sure I agree with everything Helping Hand says. I'm not entirely sure I agree with his conclusions, but I really can't argue with him. I can't say that no, Kim Possible wasn't a jerk to Ron Stoppable throughout most of the show Kim Possible. This was something that I noticed as a young child. And the thing about it was I would be mesmerized by the action. I would be mesmerized by the beauty and the sleekness of the look of Kim Possible. So I'd be enjoying it because I liked stories where heroes fought bad guys and there was a lot of kung fu action. But even as a young person, it always struck me that Kim always seemed grouchy. She never seemed like she was having fun, and she always seemed to be giving Ron a hard time. So I think I identified with Ron Stoppable, and kind of, since people make mistakes, for a character like Ron, who's kind of a klutz and kind of a goofball, we see a little bit of ourselves in him. So that's the only dimension in which I think I disagree with Helping Hand, is that I'm still nostalgic enough for the show that I can enjoy Ron Stoppable's character, but I think he is fundamentally right that throughout the course of this show, Kim is consistently belittling and being cruel to Ron. So I just referred you to watch that video for the examples of it from the actual show. Now, Kim Possible is not the most important thing about this. What's important about this is what's relevant about it for today. What's relevant about it for the cartoons and comic books and the culture war we're having right now. What I say is that pretty much the reason I think about Helping Hand's video from time to time is that it's an illustration of the kind of think piece that feminism should, in theory, be interested in, given their fascination with stories as tools of constructing cultural identity. So think about the Cinderella story. Think about how many criticisms there are of the Cinderella story as sexist and Cinderella as the proto-sexist damsel in distress trope. So given that we know that feminists are very interested in the power of story and the importance of stories for shaping culture, and that they devote a lot of time to talking about sexist trope against women in stories, why wouldn't there be a lot of feminist discussion of sexist tropes against men, or any kind of storytelling convention which puts down men and builds up women? Shouldn't that be just as interesting to feminist critics as stories which do the opposite, as stories where the woman is put down and the man is built up? Well, of course, if you were a feminist and you are ideologically committed to feminism, then you may not necessarily be interested in a story like that. Now, I'm kind of getting off topic and doing the tangents again. See, this is why I wrote the tweet thread, to try to keep me contained. So what I write is, of course, since Helping Hand is describing the mistreatment of a male character by a female character, no feminist in the history of problematic children's cartoons blog articles has thought to make a critique like this. So this is what I think is important. Helping Hand is a anti-SJW YouTuber. When I had that salty interaction with a feminist on Twitter. She said, there's no way I'm going to watch a video with SJW in the title. Get out of my mentions, right? So she pretty much just dismissed me without talking to me or talking about the video at all. And I can see why. Helping Hand is an anti-SJW YouTuber. He's got SJW in the title of his. Well, of course, if you're an SJW or a radical feminist, that's going to sort of instantly be a turnoff for you. You're not going to be interested to hear what that person has to say. But as long as Helping Hand has made a interesting or correct observation, that's going to resonate with people regardless of what other things he thinks. So for every young man who had a similar observation that I did, it doesn't have to be a young man, any young girl who paid attention to Kim and noticed that she was often dour and angry and cruel to Ron throughout that show, they're going to pick up when their ears are going to kind of like turn on when they hear someone like Helping Hand talking about that, because it's going to be kind of interesting. They'll say, oh wow, how about that? I always noticed that when I was a kid, and now this guy on YouTube, he's sort of laid out examples of it, and now it sort of makes sense. So the thing that's of interest to me is, why is it a anti-SJW YouTuber who has kind of like gone viral for making the observation that Kim Possible was consistently cruel to Ron Stoppable? Why weren't there blog articles about this back in 2004 or back in 2002? Why does it take a YouTuber in 2018 to call attention to a cultural trend like this in a children's show when there's copious articles about sexism in children's cartoons? Now, I found an example of this, of course, because everything is sexist, everything is homophobic, everything is racist. Of course, there's a feminist think piece from Bustle.com, 7 Nick and Disney shows that were secretly sexist. I tried to archive this one because I like to archive fake news clickbait like this, but I couldn't make the archive work. So if you want to read an example of a feminist looking at Kim Possible and critiquing it, this would be a good example. Now, what's the feminist problem with Kim Possible? Well, there's an instance where Kim is a damsel in distress, and Ron has to save Kim. So Kim Possible, according to the feminist, perpetuates stereotypes that women are damsels in distress who need big, strong men to save them. Sort of missing the obvious problem that for the entire run of the series, Ron is consistently portrayed as sort of an idiot who can't do anything right, who needs the capable and intelligent and brilliant Kim to always help him out and always get him out of trouble. Why would you miss that? Why wouldn't you be able to talk about that or allude to that, even as a feminist? Even if you were a feminist and you firmly believed that women were oppressed by men, that the patriarchy works to oppress women as a group, even if not every woman as an individual is oppressed. I'm referring to Estelle Friedman's description of feminism. Why wouldn't you be able to acknowledge things like tropes against men in storytelling? Wouldn't that actually even be helpful to your case about gender stereotypes in fiction? I guess what's interesting about this to me is, why wouldn't a feminist want to appeal to men by writing about how kids' cartoons are misandrist? Wouldn't that be a great recruitment tool for feminism? Yeah, if I could imagine an alternate reality where feminists were writing blog articles like how Kim Possible, top 10 ways in which Kim Possible taught young girls to be misandrist, well, boy, that would give them a lot of cred with young men, wouldn't it? If young men thought that they were being mistreated, or they thought that a cartoon was teaching girls to be mean to little boys, then a lot of men would say, wow, good on you, feminists. You are you're being consistent. You're identifying cartoons you think teach people to be mean to little girls, and you're calling out cartoons you think are encouraging people to be mean to little boys. But that's not a description of what feminism is interested in our reality, in the universe we occupy. This ties into my frustration with Estelle Friedman's moderate feminism. So I'm talking about lectures by Professor Estelle Friedman. I think they were delivered at Harvard on the topic Feminism and the Future of Women. And there's a reason I started listening to these lectures and I've done 2 videos on them. I was reading Radical feminist literature, and I was completely shocked by the hatred and the darkness of what I was encountering in radical feminist literature. So what I thought was, gee, this is so radical, this can't represent most feminists. This has to be just like a few fringe wackos. So I'm going to go try to find a moderate, stolid, intelligent feminist who isn't one of these radicals, because surely that's a better representation of what real feminism is. And then the problem I encountered with Estelle Friedman's lectures is, yes, she's not a radical feminist. I don't think she's a Marxist. But even as she describes the history of feminism, she's willing to acknowledge the connection, the historical connection to Marxism for much of feminism's history. She's willing to acknowledge a hatred of men and an idea of female superiority through much of the women's suffrage movement. I'd really strongly encourage you to listen to Estelle Friedman's lecture series, Feminism and the Future of Women, because it illustrates just how much things have changed. She made that in 2004, before YouTube, before MRA YouTube channels, before MGTOW YouTube channels. And the point of my video responding to her was essentially, I tried to imagine, what if a young man and a young woman are sitting in this classroom from 2018? What would they think of her lecture series from 2004? And I concluded that the young man wouldn't be that impressed, because he'd be interested in YouTube videos talking about men's rights issues, and Estelle Friedman doesn't care about those at all, doesn't touch on those at all. And the young woman would probably get triggered and think that Estelle Friedman's a sexist, right-wing, alt-right Nazi, because even Harvard left-wing feminist professors, mainstream feminist professors from 2004 would say things that by the attitude or by the contemporary standards of the social justice left would be deeply problematic. As Estelle Friedman would talk about in 2004, the problem Islam creates for women's rights. Well, that's Islamophobic. Estelle Friedman would talk about how she believed gender is a social construct, but she would say she believes there are two biological sexes. Well, that's problematic. That erases intersex people. We've moved so far to the left, and the feminist dialect has changed so much that the mainstream Harvard lecture feminism of 2004 looks right-wing compared to a lot of what it's interested in today. And not even before you bring in all the turf wars and trans activism and how that's starting to take over the feminist movement. So because feminists just do not spend time asking questions about misandry, this means that more and more young people are resonating with the YouTube types who are making these observations, regardless of what other beliefs they may hold. Feminism is creating their own opposition. Right, so what I'm trying to say here is that if a feminist doesn't talk about men's issues, if they only talk about how cartoons hurt women and they never talk about how cartoons hurt boys, what this means is that boys are going to go looking for answers about questions they have about themselves, portrayals of men they see in the media. And if it's even if it's the most bigoted, misogynist YouTuber ever, if the horrible person is the only person who says the true thing, then people are going to resonate with that person because they're the only ones who've been willing to say a true thing. I think this is a big problem with the alt-right. The alt-right is a dangerous identity politics movement. But if the alt-right are the only people who are willing to say white people can experience racism, then that means a lot of young people who have experienced racism are going to resonate with what the alt-right has to say. If you hate the alt-right, if you want to stop the alt-right, what you need is compassion. What you need to do is to recognize that men are human beings, that white people are human beings, and your ideology doesn't justify you hurting these people or demeaning these people or belittling these people. I don't want the alt-right to succeed. I don't want real misogyny to grow and for more and more young men to steep themselves in real misogyny. But what I'm worried about is that as it is today, feminism just doesn't have anything to say to these young men. It doesn't offer them anything. It doesn't even address problems that they have in a serious way. And if they go looking into misogynist YouTubers, then that's who they're going to end up going to. I want to stop that from happening. I would love to see feminism reform itself and to actually become egalitarian, but I don't know if that's possible. It may be that the radical element of feminism is too strong to allow feminists to course correct and actually start speaking to young men in a helpful way. I'm already convinced that the turf war is going to get much worse for the left. The thesis I'm trying to nail down is that the feminist disinterest in men is going to make it hard for them to talk about women in media without addressing men in the media with some seriousness. So the turf war, if you don't know what that is, I'm referring to trans-exclusive radical feminists, feminists who do not accept essentially the idea that of trans identity being something which exists in reality. Maybe they're okay with you saying you identify as a woman if you're a man, but they're not okay with you saying that you actually literally are a woman biologically if you are a man biologically. And this has led to a lot of these TERFs being banned, exiled from the social justice movement, because the trans movement has become the rising issue, the civil rights issue for current year, for those who want to be on the right side of history. The problem for feminists is that trans-exclusive radical feminism, that's not just a few idiot feminists on the internet. There's a deep-rooted problem for feminists hating penises and hating boys, going back decades, going back to very iconic feminist artists like Judy Chicago. I told this story in one of my long 50-minute videos that some of you watch, but it can be hard to sit through some of those super long ones. I've got a 15-minute video on a feminist documentary called War. And in it, I show a clip of Judy Chicago's school for young feminist artists. And I had to censor it because it's got two young women. It's called Cock and Bleep, C-word play. And the young woman has a giant synthetic vagina on her front, and the other young woman has a giant synthetic penis attached to her front. And the young woman pretends to be a coy and coquette housewife, and the young woman pretending to be a man, she pretends to be a really mad and angry, sexist, male chauvinist pig. And so the idea is that having a penis makes you a bad, sexist, male chauvinist pig, and having a vagina makes you a poor, oppressed victim of patriarchy and of your husband. And of course, that's trans-exclusive because it assumes that your gender has something to do with your biology, that your sexual organ, being a man biologically, has something to do with you being a man in terms of your gender. So this isn't just it's not just a few idiot feminists who are trans-exclusive. It has been the default position for a lot of feminists throughout history to have a strong distaste for men and to strongly identify as women as opposed to being a man. So here's where I'm trying to articulate something where I don't know how to articulate it or how to defend it. I think that feminism is going to have a lot more problems than we could possibly anticipate in the future because of the trans movement. I think it's going to be the straw that breaks the back for feminism, and there's no way they can survive. Their logic can survive the trans movement becoming dominant within intersectional feminism. That's the idea I'm trying to articulate. I don't know how to articulate it yet. But here's what I would think. It pretty much, if Ron Stoppable could be a woman if he identified as one, and if codes for gender in art are only social constructs, why isn't Kim's treatment of Ron potentially an issue of Kim the man abusing Ron the woman? All right, so this is kind of like one of my loopy-doopy thought experiments, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to use Kim Possible to illustrate something I think could be important in the future. I don't like trying to predict the future, because a lot of times when you say, I predict the future, it sort of has the connotation like I'm super smart and all of you are idiots, so I'm going to look in my crystal ball of super brainness to tell you here's what's going to happen in the future. And I am doing that a little bit, but the reason I want to do this is I'm fascinated with feminism. I'm fascinated with what's going to happen with it, and I'm a little worried. If I have kids, I want them to live in a peaceful world where people are kind to each other. I don't want to raise kids in an angry world where we're all fighting each other and trying to destroy each other. Race war and gender war all at the same time. So I'm imagining what if Kim was a man and Ron was a woman, and Kim looks exactly like she does now, and Ron looks exactly like he does now. Well, one thing a social justice warrior could say is this is just a silly thought experiment. It's just like you saying, oh, you identify as an attack helicopter, right? You're being facetious. You're not sincerely interested in trans issues. So hear my heart. How do you know that Kim is a woman and Ron is a man? Well, you look at them. You look for visual cues of that. If feminism, if intersectional feminism wants to accept the logic of the trans movement and try to take that to its logical conclusion, we have no reason to suspect that Ron isn't a woman or that Kim isn't a man. Now, you could say they're coded to be a certain gender. The creators of Kim Possible obviously coded Ron to be a man, and they coded Kim to be a woman. They use the pronouns he for Ron and she for Kim. But remember what death of the author is, that it's not so much what the author thinks as what the meaning the art takes on for people over time. Okay, the point I'm trying to make is that the only reason we know that Ron is a man and Kim is a woman is because we have really basic, really straightforward assumptions that biological sex exists, that it is real. Once we lose that, we lose the ability to write about how it's sexist for Ron to come save Kim Possible on a feminist blog, because the feminist blogger would have to assume that Kim is a woman and Ron is a man. Why do we have to assume that? If we can assume anything we want about fictional characters, if we all get to have our own headcanons, maybe the story of Kim Possible is a story of a male chauvinist pig, Kim Possible, consistently belittling and exhibiting her toxic masculinity towards the poor, oppressed, marginalized female Ron Stoppable. Now, this is an absurd thought experiment. It's deliberately an absurd thought experiment, but it's an absurd thought experiment that is based on what I kind of consider an absurd premise, that biological sex doesn't really exist and that men and women are only social constructs. If you begin with this absurd premise and you try to take that to its logical conclusion, it's going to lead you to other absurd things. But if you sincerely believe in the premise, you're going to want to try to take it to its logical conclusion. All right, I kind of lost the thread there. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that as long as young men don't feel like feminism is good for them, that it speaks to things they're worried about, they're going to look for answers elsewhere. Maybe some of them will think, hey, maybe if I put on a wig, maybe I'll be able to get some sweet scholarship money, or maybe I'll get some sweet job opportunities at my favorite comic book store. So not only is intersectional feminism gradually going to affect more and more young people's lives, it's also going to affect how we discuss the media. The sort of generic feminist blog article of the day is they look at a cartoon from Disney or Nickelodeon and they say, here are top 10 sexist things from this cartoon. But every one of those articles assumes that the female characters are female and the male characters are male. If you take the new intersectional left's logic to its conclusion, they're not going to be able to tell stories that make assumptions like that. And I think that the trans women, the men who identify as women, they transfer to women, aren't just going to go after the TERFs. I think that they're going to have a problem with the entire history of feminist criticism, because the entire history of feminist criticism assumes that women exist and men exist, and that patriarchy uses fiction to oppress women. How are you going to have that if men and women don't exist? It doesn't make sense. So I guess that's my point. I've said it before. I don't think that feminism and social justice makes that much sense to me. But what I'm anticipating is that old attitudes about feminism aren't going to survive in sort of the brave new world where opponents of the new intersectional feminist left are going to be called TERFs and cast out of the movement. I think Gail Simone, Gail Simone getting hoisted on her own petard was a nice little illustration of this. Here's a feminist who will gladly signal on Twitter that she is really woke and she's really hip and with it, kids, with the trans activism and the trans rights. But she writes a story where she uses what a lot of trans activists find offensive. And she did it twice. I didn't realize this in my last video on Gail Simone. She twice had Plastic Man transforming into a female character. Gail Simone did not Google what trans people find offensive in cartoons and comic books. No matter how many trans hashtags you tweet, or what color flag you change your profile to signal that you are a good intersectional feminist who's hip with the trans movement, the history of feminism has had a not every feminist, and hashtag not all, not every feminist has had problems with men. Not every feminist has been a misandrist, but there has been a identifiable element within feminism that dislikes men, and if they don't dislike men, they're at least willing to ignore male problems because as feminists they are concerned with problems experienced by females. They're concerned with tropes against women in storytelling, but that cannot survive if all men and women is a social construct. You can't have an identity movement where your politics are rooted in your identity if that identity itself is merely a social construct and isn't rooted in something real and biological. So I don't know what the future holds. Maybe the feminist movement will course correct and we won't all, despair and have a horrible civil war. But because I see these two elements of the feminist movement as 180 degrees opposite each other, what I'm anticipating is this is going to get scary. Like they're going to be tooth and claw about this because it's going to be a power struggle, and all of the cultural arguments we have about comic books are about a power struggle. People who are politically ideological want to use comic books and cartoons to indoctrinate children into what they believe is true, but they haven't even thought through what they believe enough to think about questions like, are men and women real or not? Can we have identity politics if men and women aren't real? I don't know. So I'm sorry, guys. This ended up being a Summa Tangentum video anyway, but maybe now I can go to sleep and you guys can all roast me while I catch some Z's. I'm going to end it there. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I love you guys, and I'll catch you later.